Hey, dear listeners, Brother Ed here. Before we get started, I just want to say that this episode of Head Speaks is sponsored by Big Danny and Sean Adams. We're on Patreon.com/HeadcastNetwork Big Spawn, and they get a sponsored box. So this episode is sponsored by Big Danny Cool and Sean Adams. Now, let's start episode 81, Head Speak. Welcome to the newest episode of Head Speaks, your home of all things geeky. I am your host, Aaron Brotherhead Moss. Let the show begin. Hey, dear listeners, Brother Ed here. It's time for episode 81 of Head Speaks. Our first segment today. The movies with Head. So this episode's a couple of days late. One reason I'll talk about probably the next segment, but also because as I was working on getting this episode done on February the 4th, they dropped, or I guess the trailer for new Fantastic Four. So I figure I'll talk about that a little bit. Like I did the Superman one last month. This month, the Fantastic Four trailer. So if you haven't seen the trailer yet, warning, spoilers abound. Go watch it and come back. We'll pause for you to go watch it. Okay, that's long enough because you always pause it anyways. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to play the trailer here and watch it and give my initial thoughts. I say initial, I've already watched it once or twice, but I'm going to give my initial thoughts on it, and then I'll go back through and give a slower play-by-play, if you will, deeper. Let's go and get started. I'm looking at the Fantastic official trailer on YouTube, and we're going to start it now. I don't care for Reed with a mustache. So it's a nice start to the trailer. I like Herbie. Herbie from the old Fantastic Four cartoons is in this. I like that. I like the throwback. Ben's voice sounds off. I like his look, but his voice sounds off to me. It's not, I don't know, his voice should be a little more rocky. I'll get to that in a little bit. Looks like we get a flashback to their origins. We see Sue turning invisible. We see Ben before he becomes the Thing. He's got the trench coat and hat on like he has when he's in disguise. Love that. This Human Torch. Beautiful flaming Sue. Sue looks good. I like the way Sue looks in here. We get a giant cloud in the sky. Kids wearing that Thane costume. Fantastic. I think it maybe begin the Fantastic car. I'm not sure who this old guy is. Galactus. Fantastic. As a family. Nice ending shot. So yeah. So I again, just brief thoughts. I'm watching this. But let's go back and watch this again one more time. Just their thoughts. So I'm going to pause as I go along and talk about it. So from what I understand, this movie takes place in the 60s, which is when Fantastic Four first appeared. Just the opening shot's got a very nostalgic 60s feel to it. The music is very... it's got a 60s, kind of a retro 60s kind of... nostalgic's the best word I can think of. Feel for it. Very nice. Our first look at Sue and Reed and some other guy. Again, I like Pedro Pascal as an actor. He's a good actor, but I don't like him as Reed. Well, again, I don't want to say I don't like his mustache. I know sometimes he just have a mustache. He's had beards in the comics. I didn't like that. I prefer Reed to be clean shaven, especially with his powers of stretching. I don't know. I like a clean shaven Reed myself. I don't care for Pedro's mustache in this. He kind of looks the part except for the mustache. So again, I like that he's saying that you talk about, because again, Fantastic Four was always considered Marvel's first family. So I like that they're referencing, he says we do this as a family every Sunday at 7 o'clock. I'm not sure if it's a reference to anything else offhand, Sunday at 7 o'clock. But I do like I said, we get this cheerful music playing in the background as they're talking. Pedro and I think it's Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. They make a good couple. If you just shave off that damn mustache. Anyways, I'm getting off track again. But yeah, I'm liking the trailer so far. The Marvel Studios logo is kind of like, again, a retro. I see it as kind of like a Disneyland type opening. Which, since this is now Disney, it makes sense, but it's very Disney retro. It's Disney, what you would see in the 50s. So I'll pause as I go along. We had a shot of the Fantastic Four in the Baxter Building. Nice shot of that. Again, very retro looking. We get Herbie. Herbie was from the Fantastic Four cartoon in the 80s. Again, story goes that The higher-ups didn't want to use the Human Torch because they're afraid kids would set them on fire, so they got rid of the torch and brought Herbie in. So I do like that they brought Herbie into the comics, and so I do like that the fact they have Herbie. It looks a little odd. It looks like he doesn't look as polished as he did in the cartoon and the comics. His eyes look like tape reels, and it's an interesting design. Our first look at Ben. Ben's got a full Fantastic Four bodysuit on. I know he occasionally wore bodysuits in the comics, so I'm bothered by it. Hopefully we get to see more of the Thing in his look, but the face and the hands, to me, looks very reminiscent of old school 60s, 70s Ben Grimm, the Thing. The only problem I've got so far, as I mentioned earlier, is I don't care for his voice. His voice to me, and again, the way it's always been in the comics, the cartoons, and even like most of the movies, he's got a rougher voice. It should be gravelly, because again, he's made of rocks at this. So I wish his voice was a little deeper or gravelly. It's not a deal breaker for me, but yeah, I wish it was a little more Thing-like. I'm going to stop there real quick. And yeah, and when he's clapping his hands, it doesn't sound like rock, to me at least, maybe quite sound like rocks clap. It should be a little louder, I would think. But again, personal preference. I mean, it's not bad, but I would imagine the Thing clapping his hands would be a little more, rocky. I like the costumes. They're nice. Very, very blue, very white. Again, in this world where these movie studios want to do darker costumes on their characters, Superman, Captain America, Spider-Man, all for instance. I like that we're getting the blue and white color in their costume. Because again, like I said, for superhero and comics and things, I prefer the four bright colors in it because again, it's based off. And to me, them dressing them with darker colors, making it darker hues, to me is saying they're ashamed of the comic book, which to me, as a comic book fan, annoys me that they seem to be ashamed. For decades, and a lot of them, they still do this. It says based on Marvel publications or their DC publications. It sounds too juvenile. It's what these are. These are based on comic books. So I really like the aesthetics. Again, we get a flashback. It looks like we get a flashback of them taking off originally, the ship going off into space, which gave them their powers. Again, I heard this isn't supposed to be an origin story, so I'm assuming this is a flashback to give us a brief look. If you don't know who the Fantastic Four, or at least in the current, because we've had two origins in the last 2 decades. I think the first one was 2005. I say the first one, from the 90s, never got released. The Roger Corman got released. There's been 2 in the last 2 decades, 2 origin stories, and it looks like they are sticking to the original rocket in space, cosmic rays, and all that. We'll have to wait and see. Whereas the last one, more of the Ultimate Universe, it was a science experiment. Anyway, didn't care. For the record, I will say I did enjoy the 2005 Fantastic Four movie and the sequel. It had some problems, which I'm not here to talk about that movie, but it had some problems, but I enjoyed it. I thought the main cast looked pretty good. I liked what I saw in it. So that's, to me, the benchmark Fantastic Four at this point that they have to overcome. Because as I said, the last one didn't really. But yeah, so far, the looks are looking good, except for that mustache on Pedro. Everything else is looking pretty good. We get Ben Grimm walking down the street in the trench coat, as I mentioned earlier. And that's classic Fantastic Four. Whenever Ben tries to go out incognito, in quotes, he wears a trench coat and a big fedora or whatever. So they've got this in here. I love that throwback. And he's looking at a television in a department store, it looks like. And we see Reed and Ben pre-rocket flight, I guess you can call it. And again, Ben in here looks pretty good. Ben, to me, kind of looks like he did in some of the earlier comics. So I like the actor they have there. I don't know who he is offhand, but I'm liking his look so far. This cat playing Johnny Storm, again, I forget who he is offhand. I don't know him anything offhand, but Johnny Storm looks pretty good. The fire effects look really good from what I can see. So again, just to brief him, catching on fire as he flies away, but again, it looks really good. And I liked how Reed, again, this is classic Marvel Comics Fantastic Four. And again, it depends on the writer. It goes different periods of time. It goes more and less on this. But Reed's blaming himself for everything, which Reed is one comics. And he's complaining how, Ben wouldn't be the Thing and be invisible and fire, all this. And then Sue, again, being the mother of the group, she's like, well, Ben's always been a rock. Johnny's always been Johnny. So I do like that she's there comforting him. I don't know if they're married at this point or dating or what. I'm assuming they're married from the way they're talking about being a family. But it could also be, my best friend Dean. I think they may be married. I'm hoping. I like that concept. But I know originally they weren't married in the comic. They were dating and they got married eventually later on. So another nice shot of Torch. leaving the atmosphere. I like Vanessa Kirby using the Invisible Woman's powers. Again, she's a very beautiful woman. She's a blonde. Again, a lot of times blondes, they try to give them darker hair for whatever reason. But no, she looks very much, to me at least, like a version of Sue Storm I'd see. So I think she's a great choice from what I'm seeing so far. Again, I know the name, but I don't know if I've seen her anything offhand. Again, I have to look up and see. I'll make that time right now. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. Anyways, we see Johnny up in the air, floating like almost in the stratosphere. May fall back down. I'm assuming he's about ready to turn into the Torch and fly off. Again, I just love these shots of the Torch. Fantastic. Then we are on a nighttime scene, it looks like, and there's a cosmic cloud, I'm calling it, coming towards Earth. It could be the arrival of Galactus. Spoilers. But it could be the arrival of Galactus. It could be the Cosmic Storm. I don't know what. But it's a very nice shot. I like the CGI on it. As I mentioned here, a couple scenes. Pause it. We got some kids wearing the Thane costumes. I love that. So it shows they've been around for a while. This isn't necessarily an origin story, as I mentioned earlier. Because again, the Fantastic Four apparently is known because there's kids wearing the Thane costume. I mentioned earlier there's a Fantastic car. Not really the Fantastic car, because that's got a certain design. There's this blue car streaking down the street, which was some form, probably a flying car or something. Again, Torch flying through the air. Fantastic shot there. Ben running on the ground. Again, body costumes. So we're not getting a good look at the entire thing, and I'm wondering if they are doing that for story reasons or if it's for money purposes. As to not have to, CGI or however the costume. If they keep it covered, they don't have to show as much and it'll save them some money. That's my thinking, but again, I'm liking it so far. It's a good costume, and again, there has been when he's worn full bodysuit, so it's not a deal break. A close-up of Pedro's face, your mustache. Then we get the money shot. We see a shadow of Galactus, which we saw in the second Fantastic Four movie, Fantastic Four 2. We saw Galactus coming towards Earth, and we saw in there he was like a giant cloud, but we saw his shadow against the planet. We saw Galactus, which I liked as a nice touch. I understand as a giant cloud, easier for the mainstream audience to buy, but I prefer having a Galactus, and we get a nice behind the head shot of Galactus. He's got the funky antlers, he's got the big round head, a helmet, whatever's on his head. Not a good shot of him, but it's a great shot. Seuss ends up saying, we do this as a family. And then we show a nice scene of the Fantastic Four or something on a pedestal with the giant Fantastic Four emblem behind them, lightning bolts or arrows pointing towards them. It's a nice shot. The Fantastic Four, First Steps, in theaters July 25th. And believe you me, I will be there to watch that as soon as I can. So far, like I said, it's just a brief look at it. A few minor nitpicks. Like I said, I don't like Reed with the mustache. It makes it look too much like Pedro and not Reed Richards. And I would rather have Ben's voice be deeper, gravelly, rockier. But other than that, as far as I think the set designs look really good. They're going for a retro 60s feel, but with a futuristic flair, because again, that's what the Fantastic Four. Again, if you haven't seen it, go to YouTube and do a search for Fantastic Four First Steps. It should pop up. Check it out. Let me know what you think. But yeah, I thought it was a good trailer. It's got me hyped to see it. I can't wait until July to see that one. And Superman should be out around the same time, which I talked about last month. But yeah, no, Fantastic Four. Fantastic trailer. Highly recommend go watch the trailer if you haven't seen it yet. But yeah, overall, I think it's a great trailer. As I'm talking, I re-looked watching the trailer, see if I missed anything. Reed does have the graying temples. I like that. Very nice. I do like to give him graying temples. But yeah, huge screen coming out of the floor. Nice. The rocket, to me, when they're going into space for the first time, it looks like, to me, it's got a very reminiscent flair of the 60s ship to an extent. Yeah, I'm enjoying what I'm seeing. I'm enjoying the flaming effects. What we can see of Ben, I think the thing effects look really good, whether it's practical or CG. Good job on that. Yeah, whatever life throws at us, we face together as a family. Because again, they are Marvel's first family, as they've credited or billed. Oh, I forgot to mention him. There's an old guy in there. I don't know his dad. I don't know who that's supposed to be offhand to be. I know there's a spaceman. I'm not sure who that's supposed to hand. Wait and see. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the Fantastic Four First Step. Great trailer. It's got me hyped to see it even more than I was. Highly recommend. Go watch it. And this is where I would normally insert a commercial break, but I don't think it's going to be a long episode. So we're going to go ahead and skip the commercial break this time, and let's move to the next segment. This is the Chronicles of Head. Hey, dear listeners. So, I haven't done one of these segments in a while. I'd throw one in here and explain some of my delay and what's going on. to an extent. Tell everything in motion and folding, but, and again, I've talked about some of this in the past, so it's time to talk about it again. I want to hear my personal blathering thoughts about my personal life, because that's all the show is, my personal some blathering. My own personal life and what have you. Feel free, you can go ahead and, this is going to be the last segment for this episode. If you decide to skip out, thank you for listening this far, and we'll see you next month when hopefully we have retrospect of 1980. But let's get on to this segment. Again, besides being the Chronicles of Head, I am kind of subtitling this retrospective of Head, just my own thoughts and where I'm at. And before I really get started in this portion of the show, all pour sympathy where my head's been. If you like it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. I appreciate you listening to this portion. Thank you one and all. Currently, I'm 55 years, 55 in December, 4 kids, and a total of 6 grandkids. My mother, my brother, my maternal grandparents. I've also lost my stepfather and his side, his parent. But, like I say, losing my mother, I lost her. I was while sad, it was to be expected. She wasn't the healthy. Sadly, neither am I, and I don't see that change. But losing my brother, as I've talked about previously, that is one of the biggest issues, challenges, whatever it may be in my life. As I've talked about before, and I'll talk about here briefly, I blame myself for not trying to save him. Again, I was 14. We had a house fire, briefly, you may have not heard this before, in 1984, a month before my 15th birthday. We had a house fire. My mom was down this block working at a rest home, and one of the ladies there had dementia or whatever, and she thought there was bugs crawling on her, so my brother couldn't sleep. We had school the next day, so my mom sent us home. We're like 3 houses down from where she worked at. As the older brother sent me to keep an eye on and make sure everything was okay. Again, I was almost 15. She sent us home. We get some sleep. We went into the house. My parents' bedroom was first, and then our bedroom was down the hall, next door, basically. I was tired, so I went to my mom's room and crashed, because my stepfather and me and my brother would often take turns sleeping with my mom when my stepdad was. My brother went to our bedroom and went to sleep. That was the last time I saw a house fire that woke me up. I would get out, woke up, and again, as I've talked about before, I came to the hall, saw the fire, and panicked, yelled for my brother. I didn't hear anything, so I ran out thinking he'd already gotten out. I ran around the block trying to get someone to wake up and call the fire department. And when they pulled him out, I think if I'm not mistaken, they said he was dead when they pulled him out, but they revived him, rushed him to the hospital. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks with 3rd-degree burn, 80% of it. One time while he was in there, and he died a couple of days later after I saw him. I couldn't recognize him. He was all swollen. They'd done a couple of surgeries. They thought he was going to pull out. They did a couple of skin grafts on him, trying to help him. The first couple, they said, well, it's kind of risky. They thought they were going to lose him, but he pulled through. And they're like, okay, he's pulled through all this point. He should be fine from now on out. My brother always defying expectations, a little bastard. But I blame myself for not doing to try to save him. And I know I've talked to myself, a therapist, and other professionals. Everyone says, well, you're only 14. You couldn't have done much. You can't blame yourself. And like I know my brother wouldn't blame me. I like to think he would. And I know, like my last therapist with said, what would happen if something happened with my kids in a similar situation? Would I blame them? No, I don't. I wouldn't blame anyone what happened. It's easier to say when it's somebody else than trying to forgive yourself. You've lost someone close to them, any sort of, until you're in that situation, it's hard to understand until you're in that situation. I mean, I was a Boy Scout and eventually became an Eagle Scout, so I was trained, in quotes, trained to think things through an emergency, do the right thing. But sadly, that happened. And if I would have at least tried as much as where my guilt comes from. Again, like I said, I've talked about this before on some of my podcasts, especially and over the years, I've had my feelings on it has gone back and forth, but sometimes I'm better off and at other times. As I get older, the more I think about it, again, hindsight is 20/20, as they say. And that's a lot of what's bothering me as I get older. In fact, last year was the 20th anniversary of his death, house fire and his death. And I thought I was being bothered more than I was, but I didn't think I was busy on that day, and I didn't think much about it. Every so often it pops up, and it strikes at me. Grief, horrendous thing. And like I've said before, your mind is very powerful. Your mind can do lots of things. Your mind can convince them they're sick, convince them they're well. So if your mind turns against you and it's against its best interest, that can be problematic. I say that because that is one of my problems in my life at this point. Again, I do have depression. Like I said, I've talked with counselors, therapists, and all this. A lot of them say, my last counselor I spoke, their therapist, because again, she knows I'm a geek. So as Yoda says, or try not. They're basically saying I need to get over it. It's hard just to get over something, especially if you're younger. It can affect you for life. And again, that's one thing. Say sometimes I think about it more than others. Sometimes I can watch a movie with fire in it, no problem. Other times I see a house on fire and it bothers me. It's one of those things I don't ever get. I took a writing class, and part of the story I had a scene, older brother. I basically rewrote that fire scene, trying to get some closure in my mind. And when I submitted, I read it, said that it's unbelievable because they don't believe would do that. Like, I've got a younger brother and I wouldn't do that. Honestly, in that story, that was the only thing in those part that is true. Everything else was, fictional. Is basically what happened. I don't know. I say that's what affects. It's not giving me depression, but that feeds into my depression when my mind gets. I try to sidetrack my mind and think about other times. It's hard. Sometimes it goes off on these tangents. And so again, I'm saying that just to kind of help explain where I'm at. And again, as I said, I have got depression, and sometimes when I'm doing my podcast, it helps. It gets me out of my mind, or it gets me, thinking about these comics I love from days of old, or TV shows, or whatever it may be. But sometimes when I'm trying to record an episode like this episode here, I was trying to feel on it. Because again, I got my retrospective of the 80s I'm working on. I've got all these other comics I've got lined up to do, all these TV shows I could talk about. Sometimes when I'm working on a podcast, I say let go and just go with the flow and do it. Other times when I try to do it, I just get myself to sit down. I try and I start to, then just like my mind blanks out or my depression kicks in, so I'll walk away. So anyone that's listening to this, I apologize for the delays. I know they're there, and I've also, like I said, I've got 4 kids. My 2 boys from my first marriage are older. One's married, the other's divorced. They both got their own kids. Lovely, beautiful grandchildren. My sons, for having me as a father, have grown up to great, wonderful men. I love them dearly. Wonderful parents, wonderful father, husband, done a great job at life, being my kid. And my younger, as I say, my daughter, she's trans, which I'm having up because, again, school Pentecost. I've given up on religion and sham. A lot of that stuff is still in my head from the way I was raised. So I'm dealing with that. My youngest son, anxiety, he's got ADHD. He's only 10 years old, but he's worrying about death and dying. It worries about everything. And again, with his ADHD, and listen half the time his medicine properly. And on that, trying the right combination of medicine that makes it listen what he's supposed to, but not suck the life out of him. So as a father, I'm dealing with that. And my oldest kids have their problems. Again, I believe that the mental issues come from my side of the family. Again, as I've talked about depression, these other. Again, I'm 55 years old, playing with G.I. Joe action figures and reading comics and watching cartoons. Not paying that down, but I mean, I don't know. I'm 55. My body feels, and I'm sure a lot of other people have similar, especially people in my line, comic book podcasters, my fellow geeks out there. I'm sure sometimes they feel similar, but. And again, I'm trying to figure out how far to go with this. I'm not trying to depress or bring anyone down, looking for sympathy. I'm just trying to lay myself out there so people know who I am and what I'm dealing with. Kind of help explain why sometimes some of my pod delayed. Trying to find time with the kids and work. And again, when I do have the time, fighting through depression to do some of these sometimes, that's why they get. And I've got some other issues in my life that, again, they're still ongoing, so I don't comfortable talking. Once I get some of that cleared up, maybe I'll more detail. But again, this is just a small little segment of Clear the Air, who I am, why my shows have delayed. Again, I'm trying to get them out on a basis. And my other problem is I do have a bit of a podcast addiction as far as making podcasts. I've got all these ideas, and it's trying to rein them in and bring it, down to specific things and not have a dozen podcasts when I don't have time. 2 shows to end, do with them, but we'll see what happens. But I do appreciate everyone that listens to my shows. Like I said, I don't get much traction on this one. And that's the other thing that kind of, the fact that I do these shows, I put my heart into them. And I don't get a lot of listeners on my shows. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's just the topics. Again, I tend to pick things that, on the fringe, the Will Payton Starman, Suicide Squad, Checkmate, things like that probably don't have a lot of people interested in. But I don't know. I feel that I'm lacking some. Again, I'm a podcaster, but in my opinion, I'm a mediocre podcaster, partly because I get my shows out on time like I should. And also, I don't know. I just feel that. And this problem in my marriage I've had is I'm not a big talking mundane things. Again, you get me talking about comic books, sometimes I just won't shut up. And then sometimes I kind of, I don't know about struggle, but Well, I try to think I'm a smart man. Sometimes I can't think of the right word. I'm kind of simple. I like how this looks. I don't study Jared over my G.I. Joe show. He's got a lot of the art techniques. Brad is an established writer, so he knows the writing aspect. And myself, I'm a wannabe. I've got several ideas. I've started a couple of things. But again, and also that feeds into my delays on my podcast, as I'm a bit of a procrastinator. And I'm forgetful, which is not a good combination. I'll do this in a little bit, then I'll forget to get back to it. And I'm working on ways to remedy that. But I want everyone to know that I do appreciate you guys, and I enjoy putting these out there. It's just sometimes I get... And that's kind of where this whole tangent's come. Well, not really tangent, but this whole segment is come from, is just kind of clearing up the air about who I am and where I'm at. I'm sure there's a lot more to say, but you guys, again, this episode's already almost a week late today and get it out there for you guys. So thank you for listening if you're still there. Next month, I hope to return back to the 80s, back to 1981, I believe. Pulled out last episode. And TV show, or maybe I'll start. We'll see what happens next month. But until then, remember, Head has spoken. Thank you for joining us on another great episode of Head Speaks. I can also be found rambling on other Headcast Network shows, such as the Task Force X Headcast, where I cover all the appearances of the Suicide Squad and Checkmate comic books from the late 80s, early 90s, over on G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, where me and my guest hosts look back at the comic book and TV series from the 80s. And in addition, we also have Bravo Team, where we look at other G.I. Joe related paraphernalia. And over on the Starman Adventure Show, where I reread the Will Payton Starman comics and talk about them, once again, from the late 80s. In addition, myself and my wife Michelle, along with our friend from the land down under, Hayden McQueenie, talks about the TV show Quantum Leap monthly over on the Starbright Project. All of the Headcast Network shows can be found on your favorite podcatcher or at my home on the internet, which is at headcast.headspeaks.com. Over on Facebook, X, and Instagram, look for Headcast Network. And please feel free to email your bitches, moans, and gripes to head@headspeaks.com. Also, feel free to email any compliments you have. If you want to record a message, you can send it to me at head@headspeaks.com, and I'll play it on the air. And be sure to join us next time for another fun-filled Headcast from your friendly neighborhood brother Head. And be sure to tell a friend. Until next time, I'll see you in the funny pages.